Well, here we are again. I'm going to pick this up on air pollution, and I think we can go ahead and punch through on the whole PowerPoint presentation in less than 15 minutes. So I'm going to pause it here, and we're going to pick it up on the PowerPoint. So here we are. My first slide here is a little bit whimsical. It's an apocalyptic scene. But what I'm trying to get across is gasoline-powered fossil cars pollute the air as well as emitting greenhouse gases. And so I went online and I found a list of the air pollutants that's come from gas and diesel-powered cars and trucks. And I was shocked at the size of the list. There's no way I can go through all this with you. We have particulate matters, PMs, hydrocarbons, HCs, nitrogen oxide, NOx, carbon monoxide, CO, carbon dioxide, SO2, hazardous air pollution and toxics, which account for half of all cancers, and greenhouse gases, of course. But I decided to keep the list just simply to show you how extensive it is. That's impressive in and of itself, so there you are. This was a meme I got off of Facebook. It came up during Dieselgate. Someone showed a coal-powered train with a VW logo pasted on the front of it. Enough said about that. Diesel's not good, especially in cars. We just don't need it for cars. As England and Europe is finding out, much to their chagrin. EVs are more reliable and they just need less service. EVs have fewer moving parts than fossil cars, 200 versus over 2,000, which means they're simpler, more durable, and need less maintenance. EVs do not need oil changes. Brake wear is much less on EVs because they use regenerative braking. And this not only reduces the cost, it means the whole aftermarket setup to service internal combustion engines will be much diminished, which is one of the reasons the automobile industry is dragging their feet on them. And just to prove the point, here's an exploded diagram of an internal combustion engine. Now I'll grant you this is a big V8, but still you can see the complexity of it here. The amount of moving parts in it is just staggering. And here's the transmission. Internal combustion engine transmissions are now up to 10 speeds to try to wring efficiencies out of them. So you can imagine they'd have a lot of moving parts. EVs just have a gear reduction transmission, which allows the electric motor to run at a higher rate of speed than the wheels on the car actually run, which gives you more torque. And since electric motors can run a lot faster than a combustion engine, RPM wise, it's not a problem. It's actually desirable. And here's the exploded diagram of an electric motor. As you can see, it's simplicity itself compared to the internal combustion engine. I'm going to go back real quick to it just so you can see it. Right there. There's your internal combustion engine. There's your electric motor. Enough said. Now this graph here is very interesting and I think it's very important. It shows different sectors: building, industry, transportation, and the power sector, and by that we mean the electric utility power sector. And this is CO2 emissions by sector. And as you can see, since roughly about 2007 or 8, the power sector has gone down. This dip right here has to do with the recession we went through. But as you can see, because more renewables have been coming online in the electric power sector, total carbon emissions from it have been on a downhill slide. And this is the one good news in the United States, where otherwise our government's denying climate change right now. And you can see right here the transportation sector has went down a little, but then it's leveled out, and now it's climbing back up again because of more and more horsepower in vehicles, which as the automakers get the capability of making more efficient engines, they tend to use it to make more horsepower and not to make more efficient vehicles. So anyway, the lines cross right here. But with the widespread of adoption of EVs, these two lines would match. In other words, as this one went down, this one would go down. So forth. And of course, as more people charge their own at home, like I do with the solar power, it would go down also. And these other lines should also start to trend down as we adopt more and more renewables in our power sector. So, but the important point about this is that if we don't switch to electric vehicles and we just address the power sector, we're missing half the equation. As the next slide will show. Nope, it's not there. Transportation accounts for 27% of all emissions. So if we just address the power sector and we don't address the transportation sector, we're missing a large chunk. That's what I'm trying to get across here. Electric motors are superior to internal combustion engines because they can recoup energy from braking and return it to the battery pack. The electric motor doesn't need to run while the vehicle stopped. Electric motors have no latency, which means they can start and run almost instantly. This means you're not wasting energy. And when you step on the electron pedal, you just go instantly, quietly, and quickly. And they have all their torque from 0 RPM. And you do not need to waste time shifting gears. There's actually a lag in between gear shifts where you're not applying energy to the rear wheels, so you're wasting time and energy picking that thread back up. We fill up at home for the most part. Takes us 2 hours and 10 minutes to replenish the battery on our 20 mile range PHEV. And if we had an all-electric vehicle, we would go to a larger 240 volt charger, which would be capable of 32 amps instead of 16 amps like the current one is. So we would reduce our time more than half on charging once again. Charging options, and this is important. A lot of people have questions about this, and one of the misnomers I see out there is some people will tell me, well, 120 volt charging is good enough for me. I just charge overnight or whatever at home. But what they don't realize is they're only charging at 72% charging efficiency. So they're losing nearly 30% of their electricity trying to charge their vehicle at 120 volts, which is costing them money. If you go to 240 volts, you can jump up to 82% charging efficiency, and that's a 10% gain. And around 32 amps, you're at 90% efficient on charging efficiency. So this can make a difference on your cost. So it's really important to go to 240 volts and higher amperage charging if you have a vehicle that's capable of taking it. Our vehicle doesn't really require over 16 amps, so I have no need to go beyond that. I charge in the daytime when I'm generating solar power. And so all I'm losing is 8 cents a kilowatt hour because that's what El Paso Electric pays me for my power. And it just means I get a smaller stipend from El Paso Electric because I'm charging my vehicle. But if I had an off-peak rate, which would be ideal, the El Paso off-peak rate is 6 cents a kilowatt hour, but they only offer it to businesses at night. They don't offer it for residential use for EVs. Fast charging or DC charging currently in New Mexico is only available in Albuquerque, which is kind of a bummer. Maybe there's some in Santa Fe, I'm not sure. But We need DC fast charging every 150 miles to make electric cars viable. Electric cost. EVs are agnostic. Here I go. Well, electricity is a little more expensive than gasoline, and that's another misnomer you see out there. People will tell you that electricity is cheaper than gasoline, and it's not. EVs themselves are so much more energy efficient that the cost per mile can be dramatically reduced when compared to internal combustion engines. So using 12 cents a kilowatt hour with 0.9 charging efficiency, that's $4.37 a gallon equivalent. But because I'm charging at the rate of 8 cents a kilowatt hour using photovoltaics, I'm spending $2.91 a gallon. Now by spending, I mean it's just money I don't see. It doesn't come to me. Because I'm selling power about 9/10 months out of the year. Reducing carbon emissions. Transportation accounts for 27% of all carbon emissions. Emissions could be reduced to 9% or less with no other changes other than using EVs. However, if we go to renewables, carbon emissions could then be reduced to nearly zero from the power and transportation sectors at least. If we don't, we have to switch to EVs also in conjunction with greening up the power grid. There are other parts of the transportation sector that need to be addressed also. There are heavy trucks, buses, trains, airplanes, and ships. And there's quite a bit of technological development going along on these areas also. Buses especially, now cheaper than regular buses, really, over life cycle costing. As you all know about maybe the Tesla truck. Trains could be electrified with catenary lines. We've had catenary line trains in the United States back 50, 60 years ago, at least one line, the Milwaukee line. Airplanes currently are probably short-ranged electric prop-driven. And there's some movement on ships because they can use fuel cells in ships in large applications like this. They don't need the expensive fuel cells. So electricity is easier to deliver in the supply chain. It doesn't have to physically be transported. It can just be sent over power lines, basically. There's 7% losses for transmission. Let me see, in the next decade, the current marketplace, technological development of electric vehicles, they're poised to take over the marketplace in the next 10 years. They're simply superior to fossil cars and cheaper to operate by a factor of 2. Once price parity is reached in the next few years, consumers will catch on to the benefits of EVs. And once they get to a market penetration around 80% of sales in the next 10 years, following a classic S-curve pattern. At that point, internal combustion engine vehicles will not have high enough residual value to justify their financing or purchase other than from niche users. So here's the beginning of an S-curve up through this year. You can see the sales are really ramping up. Although percentage-wise it's still small, but that's an exponential curve you're looking at. And this is what the S-curve looks like. This is a generic S-curve. Right now we're in the area of influentials. Anyone buying electric cars today are not just opinion leaders, but they're influentials. And we're headed towards the early majority. Right now Norway's at 35% market penetration. And then you get into the late majority. And then once you reach 90%, the laggers and the diehards are the last to buy. And that's where the S-curve begins to flatten out. But at this point, it's irrelevant. Okay, well, I'm going to stop it here. This is the end. New York City went from horse-drawn carriages to cars in about 10 years, as you can see, and the reason was cost. I got to stop here. Bye.